Om Ajnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Welcome everyone to the Wednesday night program. It's actually our eternal program. We perpetually go on with this process of bhakti, hearing and chanting in whatever situation we're in. And we just happen to have the good fortune of being able to gather in this one place on a regular basis, especially take association with devotees, because we become encouraged by seeing others, just being around other devotees, just the fact that devotees come. If you're inspired, then if you're not inspired, then the meeting needs you, they used to say in these. And if you're not inspired, you need the meeting, and if you are inspired, then the meeting needs you. So either way, one should come to the association of devotees. Tonight we have the good fortune, Kanka Devi Dasi is here. She's one of the pioneers of the ISKCON movement. Spent most of her life spreading Krishna consciousness, traveling, teaching others, and she's also maybe collected more funds than practically anybody else in the history of ISKCON, and donated it selflessly to the Krishna consciousness movement over the years. So we welcome Kanka Devi Dasi. We thank Puneet, who's come all the way from Atlanta, Georgia, to visit ISV. It's very nice to see you. Is your wife here tonight? Or she'll be joining later. Keshav is in tow, so there's always some extra arrangements to be made. And all of you, thank you. You've been working hard all day at one thing or another. And now you've come here for a respite to replenish your heart and mind. And to all of those of you who have joined us online tonight, thank you for taking a break in your schedule. Maya has a tendency of working us very hard, and she has a tendency when we say time for Krishna Katha, she says, why, just keep working. But we know better, because we understand that the root of happiness, at the root of success and progress in life, is the water of Krishna Katha, this transcendental sound vibration. And that merely working hard is not the answer to the burning desire we have in our heart for satisfaction. There are those who have the capability of working very, very hard in this world, but doesn't mean that they're satisfied, doesn't even mean they get ahead. And ultimately, nobody really gets ahead in the material world, because everything's repossessed at a certain time. But those who are intelligent realize that taking advantage of the opportunity to hear about Krishna and the association of devotees naturally increases one's good fortune in life. And part of that good fortune is to develop the mood of a servant. One point I heard recently that really struck me. Just such a simple point, and as I've mentioned many times in this class and the song we've sung so frequently, written by Bhaktivinoda Thakur, Radha Krishna Bol. Bhaktivinoda Thakur makes the statement that if you simply accept this one principle that I'm a servant, then there'll be no more misery for you. And this is a very profound, although albeit simple, point. But there is the opposite mood, which is to consider oneself the controller and enjoyer. And this is a natural tendency Krishna mentions in the Bhagavad Gita. Icha dvecha samutena dvandvamohena bharata sarvabhutani sammoham sargayanti parantapa. he says that everyone has a kind of impetus for enjoying this material world, icha. They have a desire, everything they see, mine. And in a gross way and a subtle way also. The false ego wants to appropriate everything I do, perhaps even in service. Apparently serving, but there may be an enjoying ego that goes along with it, thinking that I'll be recognized for my service. Even those who can become great renunciates because of past samskars and practice of renunciation, sometimes become glorified for their renunciation, and then they become overwhelmed subtly in thinking that they're very great, which is sort of the opposite of the idea of renunciation in the first place. So we don't have control over the enjoyment we get in this world, in case you haven't noticed. But if I'm interested, if I fix my mind on a certain goal for my own enjoyment in this material world, first of all, it's not guaranteed that I'll get it. And second of all, it is guaranteed that I'll become frustrated, because even if I do get it, I'll lose it. And Krishna points this out in the Bhagavad Gita in many places, especially 8th chapter. He talks about the way in which this whole material creation is a temporary situation. And he certifies that from the top of the universe down to the bottom, Abrahma bhuvana loka punar avartenor arjuna, mamupete tukontia punar janma nividyate. He recommends just get out of the whole thing altogether, because whatever you find from top to bottom in the material world won't satisfy you. It's a place of misery, he says. Dukhalayam ashashvatam. It's the alayam, the place of duk. And you might say, okay, that's all right, I don't mind, I can tolerate the misery. You say, well, you can't stay anyway, because whatever situation you're in, ashashvatam, then it's temporary. You'll be moved along. So we have no control or guarantee that we'll be fulfilled by, that we'll be able to fulfill any material desire, ultimately. And there's a fear, and it's a very justified fear, that my desires won't be fulfilled. Bhayam dvitiya binibeshita syad ishad apetasya viparya yosmritihi. Kavi Yogendra, from the 11th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam, says, Bhayam dvitiya binibeshita. When I have a separate interest from the Lord, in other words, when I'm not thinking like a servant, which is my real nature, and I'm thinking, I want to enjoy separately, I want to have something for myself, for my enjoyment, then bhayam, fear comes. And you can just sort of think about times in your life when you've been afraid that you might not get something, or things might not go the way you wanted to, or just that bad things might come to you. Have you ever had that experience? And so much of it is in our mind also, because generally we catastrophize about how many things are going to go wrong in the future and how they might go wrong. In the meantime, I can be sitting peacefully anywhere. I can be in heaven sitting and then thinking what might go wrong in the future and so forth. Some degree these fears are justified because my object of life is misplaced, and I'm thinking about I'm thinking in the wrong mood. Bhayam dvitiya abhinibeshita means to be absorbed in things that are not for service. They're for my own enjoyment. I'm absorbed in them. And the more absorbed in them I become, the more fear I have of losing. And it's ironic in a sense, because losing something that I never really had. That's Maya. You never had it and you're never going to get it, but you're afraid you're going to lose it. So it's not yours in the first place, and you can't keep it anyway. And so, bhayam dvitiya binibeshata syad means that it arises, fear arises from that kind of absorption. Ishad apetasya vivarya yosmriti. So that the cure is hinted in the second line, that it's because I've turned my attention away from my service. To who? Ishad, the controller. The one who's actually the enjoyer. And I'll get into this more in the class, but for one who's a conditioned soul, the very concept that there's a supreme enjoyer is abhorrent. So why I'm the enjoyer. I want to be the center enjoyer. However, one can understand that through a practice and through the philosophy of Krishna consciousness, something very interesting and compelling, and that is that the servant enjoys more than the master. After all, the servant who's completely sold out to the king, lives like a king, has all the facility and protection of the king, but doesn't have to worry about all the stuff the king worries about. He just has to worry about doing his duty. The king has to protect the citizens, worry about the treasury, worry about his family, and so forth. But the humble servant of the king lives at a standard, the same standard as the king, same honor as the king practically, because he's the servant of the king, but he doesn't have to take the same burden as the king. And in one lecture, Prabhupada was speaking about how those who are servants of Krishna, really, they don't have anything to worry about because it's really Krishna's problem. We're just trying to help him out. So, and Krishna can handle it. And that's why he's Isha. He's the supreme controller. Ishad apetasya. So I turn my attention away from my service to Isha. Ishad apetasya viparya smritihi. And then I've forgotten everything. I've forgotten who I am. And I've developed I have an identity crisis. And there's a way in which I've been facilitated in that through the kindness of the Lord, the way He arranges everything is He fulfills the desires of every living entity. Saparya gach chukram akayam avranam asnaviram shudam apapavidham kavir manishi paribu swayambhurya tatatyatortan viradashas fatibhya samabhyaha. The Ishopanishad describes how He's a person. He has transcendental senses, he's all purifying, he's all perfect, and he's been fulfilling the desires of every living entity since a time immemorial. That's an astounding statement. And the first time I read it, it really rocked me. To think of how the Supreme Person is fulfilling the desire of every living entity, and it's so intimate also because he's been fulfilling my desires also. I'm just desiring the wrong things is the problem. And if I purify my desire and I turn my attention back to my master and become reinstated in my service, then for me, there's no problem. Now, we can't control our material enjoyment in this world. Otherwise, we'd be God. And it's a frustrating point for living entities who are trying to control the outcome of their happiness in this material world. But there is something that we can control, and that is our service. If we want service, it's under our control. Wanting sense gratification is out of our control because it's based on our previous karma, and you get what you get, whether you like it or not. But service is in our control. You want to control something, control your service. That means you can serve in any circumstance. It doesn't matter what it is. And your service to Krishna can never be taken away from you unless you let it go. That's your eternal prerogative. That's who you are. That's your constitutional position. And therefore, it can't be taken from you. And one who's fixed in devotional service, seva nishta, they're called seva nishta. They're fixed in service. They understand this fact that I'm a servant. Jiv Krishna Das, e Bishwas. They have this faith, I'm a servant of Krishna. And why do they suddenly become happy? Because you get what you want. Always get what you want when you're a servant. because service is available at every second and in every corner of the universe. Whereas sense gratification is elusive. I can chase it to every corner of the universe, but I never quite get it. It always stays just out of reach. Kutra shisha shruti sukham mrigatrishni rupa. Prahlad says, where is it? I don't see that anybody's ever gotten it. They're searching for the benediction of the goddess of fortune in this material world, Kutra. But where is it? You hear about it, but you never actually get it. It's always just ahead of you, like the mirage, the Mrigatrishni Rupa. But service is present wherever you are. And we've seen practically that a person who's developed a service attitude can be anywhere. And this is brought up in the Srimad Bhagavatam. Narayana parak sarvena kutaschana bhibyati. Swarga pavarga narakeshu apitulyana darshana. For the person who is absorbed in this mood of service, selfless service, that I'm a servant and I'm doing service for service, they don't care whether they're in their heaven or hell, because it's equal to them. Because there's service in heaven, there's service in hell, and everywhere in between. So what does it matter to the servant? So servant is always happy, and the servant controls his or her own happiness and destiny, because you can always take more service, and you can always engage yourself in service. And it's just a practical matter that if you develop this, you can try it yourself wherever you go. Even you're traveling in devotee association. If you gravitate towards service, you look around and you think, how can I serve in this situation? As Radhanath Maharaj gave us this example of salt. How can I be like salt? Salt you don't see the salt in the food. And nobody says, this is really nice tasting salt. Everyone notices the food, the taste of the food, and they say, this tastes very nice. So the salt serves, but in a way that nobody notices. The salt is the support. So this means selfless service. If you take up the mood of selfless service, I'm not serving for any other reason. I'm not serving because my false ego has appropriated this serving mood, and therefore I'm showing my service in such a way that I'll be recognized. This is a trick that robs one of the happiness that comes from service. And then it can turn into something else. One who takes away the service mood. Serving without a serving mood, what is that? Serving without a service mood, without a service attitude, that can be something else. So it's required that one develop the service mood in order to completely satisfy the self. Savai pumsam paro dharmo yato bhaktiradhoksaje ahaitukya pratiyata yaya masu prasidati. Here it is, the answer that everyone's looking for. How can I be completely satisfied? And Sutta Goswami just says it in a perfect verse. He says that every person in the world who develops this attitude of service, and which is unmotivated, I'm doing service for service, no other reason except it's my constitutional position to serve. And there's no interruption in it. I'm not still affected by the desire to try to enjoy the material world from it. A person who's in that fortunate situation, in that fortunate mood, in that state of mind, will feel satisfaction of the self, and no other way. Back to the material world. What is the situation Arjuna faces on the battlefield of Kurukshetra? One of my favorite lectures Prabhupada gave, when he speaks about verse 130. And there's a word in there that Prabhupada emphasizes over and over again in this verse when he gives a lecture. You should listen to this when you get the chance. Viparitani. Viparitani. Na cha shokshnam yavastatum brahmativa cha me manaha nimitani cha pashyami viparitani keshava. So we'll look down in the word for word a little further, and you'll see that viparitani means just the opposite. So Arjuna came with a non-service attitude at first onto the battlefield. And now he's looking at the whole situation. He's saying, this is exactly the opposite of what I wanted. That's what happens when you have the wrong attitude. When I have the wrong attitude, I get exactly the opposite. And here's what Prahlad Maharaj says about the opposite that I get when I'm in the enjoying spirit. This is text 7.7.42 from the Srimad Bhagavatam. In this material world, every materialist desires to achieve happiness and diminish his distress, and therefore he acts accordingly. Actually, however, one is happy as long as one does not endeavor for happiness. As soon as one begins his activities for happiness, his conditions of distress begin. This is a very sophisticated verse that can only be understood by those who have developed a taste for spiritual life. I'll read it again, because for those of you who have developed this taste for spiritual life, it's very sweet actually, because it's confirming, it's closing the door on an old enemy, which is the enjoying spirit, and saying that I no longer need you in my life. I no longer desire you around anymore. You stay over there, and I'm going to be in here. And here's the verse again. In this material world, iha, in this material world, every materialist desires to achieve happiness and diminish his distress, and therefore he acts accordingly. Actually, however, one is happy as long as one does not endeavor for happiness. As soon as one begins his activities for happiness, his conditions of distress begin. We have in the 6th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam the story of Maharaj Chitraketu. There are many stories in the Srimad Bhagavatam of kings. Of course, we're hearing about the lineage of kings because it leads up to the appearance of Krishna in the 10th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam. And there's another reason that the acharyas, especially Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, has said that we're hearing so much about kings, and that is that everyone wants to be a king in this material world. And king means that you get everything you want. And there are examples of many kings in the Srimad Bhagavatam in which they don't get what they want. They get the opposite of what they want. And that should be a clue for those who aren't kings, that if a king can't get what he wants, then what about me? So Chitraketu Maharaj was in a familiar predicament, one that we've heard about before with Dasarath in the Ramayana, and similar situations. One of the main a preoccupation of a king is that I must have a successor. I have to have a son. Primogeniture means that I have to have a son to pass on the kingdom to, and so forth. It was part of the social system, actually, and it meant security for the country, that the king was ruling. Everything got passed on in that way. So Chitraketu, it says in the Bhagavatam, he had millions of wives. Millions of wives, and he couldn't get a son. So he was in distress. And even he had millions of wives, he had a kingdom and so forth, he couldn't get a son, and he was unhappy. So then he met a sadhu. Angira Muni, came to meet him. And Angira Muni was received by the king in a very lovely way, with great respect. The king bowed down to him and offered him all kinds of service. And then Angira could understand that the king had a desire. And he said, "How can I help you?" And the king said, "I'm happy except for one thing." And it's always that one little thing. There's always another little thing after that too. That's the problem in the material world. You have to turn your head in a different direction. But he needed a son. He had to have a son. He couldn't be happy without a son. So Angira Rishi gave him a benediction curse. He said that I will, by my sukriti, my devotional power, I will arrange for you to have a son. But I warn you that the son will be the cause of both your happiness and lamentation. And the king thought, I can handle that. And that's one of the mentalities that keeps one in the material world, and that is that I can live with that. In fact, Prabhupada talks about in one of his poems that he wrote in Vrindavan, a man in a hospital who has tubes coming out of various orifices in his body. And when a friend comes to visit, says, how are you? And the man says, I'm fine. And Prabhupada said, what is this fine? It is the fine of the material world. That actually, we're not fine, but I'm considering myself fine, and that I'll live with this. And stoically, I will deal with the onslaught of miseries that come rather than bow my head to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So in any case, the king thought all sons are a little bit disobedient to their father at one point in their life because it's the nature of a living entity to go his own way, so I can handle that. My son may cause me a little distress, but I'll deal with it. And as soon as Angira left, actually before he left, he performed a sacrifice in which there was some special prasad produced. And from that prasad, one of his wives, one of Chitraketu's wives, his youngest and I would consider the first wife, was able to bear a child. So she got pregnant, she had a child, and there was celebration in the kingdom. And Chitraketu was then filled with joy, and so was the queen, and so were all the servants, but the other wives were not happy because they suddenly felt left out. All the attention went to one wife, the other wives became second-class citizens, and out of envy, they conspired to kill the child. This is how strong envy is in the material world, that one can feel such dissatisfaction and try to rearrange the circumstances by force in order to find happiness. So they poisoned the child. The king was out riding his horse, and the queen was home with the maidservant. The maidservant came to the crib where the royal child had been sleeping, but then the nursemaid noticed that the eyes of the child were turned upward, and the child had expired. And so the nursemaid began to pound her chest and wail and repeatedly say, oh, my life is ruined, and fell to the ground. And the queen came to see what had happened, and then of course she became overcome. She was overcome with grief and fainted. And then all of the servants in the whole palace began to wail and cry, and the sound vibration reached the ears of Chitraketu Maharaj, who bounded into the palace to find out what had happened and discovered that his son had died. And the descriptions of the grief of the king and queen and all of those who were attached to them and to the child is actually moving. In a sense, we know that when people around us are experiencing extreme suffering, we feel for them also. The king fainted. He couldn't handle the prospect of having had this son and then lost the son. Imagine being so distraught that you would faint and fall to the ground. And as he rose again, he'd faint again. It was at this time that Angira Rishi came back. And this time he brought with him Narada Muni, his associate. They were associates. And in the melee that was had taken place, the sages re-entered And by the mystical power of Angira, he induced the living entity who had occupied the body of that little child to reappear, and then actually to come back into the body of that baby. And then he asked, why have you left? And why have you given grief to your parents by leaving like this? And the living entity, who's described as the living entity, not as the child of the king, because now he's more, the scene is more objective, because now he's a living entity who's come back, and we can see he's different from his body. Says, which parents? I really beg your pardon, but I've had so many, and I don't recognize these parents. And this is the situation in the material world. Even Hiranyakashipu, when he was appeasing his family members after the death of Hiranyaka, had given a very interesting verse about how people come together to drink cold water or in a restaurant, that they come to a watering hole and they stand around together for a few minutes and then they go in different directions. He said, that's what's happening to us in our family lives. We come together for a couple seconds and then we're dispersed again. And the child being questioned by Narada Muni then revealed that he had been moving from one body to another since a time immemorial in the material world. And Krishna says the same thing to Arjuna to bring him out of his despair when he faced killing his own family members, doing a duty that he saw would bring him the reverse of what he actually expected, and so forth. And he just gave him some very straightforward knowledge. Dehino smin yatha dehe komaran yovanam jara tata dehantara praptir tiras tatra namuyati. That the soul is the dehi and the body is the deho. It's that we're occupying a place, and we're not that place, we're just occupying it temporarily. Dehino asmin yata dehe komaran yovanam jara. And the body's changing, it's mechanical, there's information, we can all understand this language in this day and age, there's already information within the cells and so forth for it to develop in a certain way, and it's changing. And I'm simply taking that spot temporarily because of my karma, and it changes from boyhood to youth to old age. It's a mechanical process. And then the body is then lost, and never will that same body be resurrected again. It's gone forever. And a sober person who understands what's really going on won't be affected by this. Dhiras tatanamuyati, won't be illusioned or disturbed by all this. This is the kind of knowledge that Chitraketu Maharaj and his queen were receiving. But imagine the circumstances, how this stage was set. And in this section, Srila Prabhupada mentions how the king was not open to this kind of knowledge when Angira came the first time, because his desire was so strong that I have to have this thing now. If he had tried to give him Atma Tattva Gyan, knowledge of the self, at that point, he wouldn't be able to hear it. Bhogaishvarya prasaktanam taya prahita chetasam. That a person who's overcome by this desire to enjoy the material world and who's bewildered by the opulence that he might get or that he has acquired temporarily, can't think straight. You can't entertain these ideas about the difference between the body and the soul and so forth. So when they came back, they gave this knowledge, and Chitraketu began to become dhira, or sober, because of this situation. And at that point, he wanted to know, well, how do I change? How do I come out of this quagmire of material desire that I've fallen into? And Narada Muni then initiated him. He gave him a mantra. He gave him instructions and he gave him mantra. And Chitraketu very, very seriously took this. He took it very seriously, and he began chanting the mantra and practicing everything that Narada had told him. And within a week, he was able to see Sankarshan, the Lord's first expansion, face to face. Yeah, I heard a talk the other day. Someone who didn't sound that serious about spiritual life, but was asking Prabhupada about, how long does it take? Prabhupada said, it can be within a moment. It can be within a second. It depends on you, on how serious you are. So when Chitraketu saw the Lord, he became purified, became a pure devotee. And these kinds of scenarios are given in the Srimad Bhagavatam to remind us that we're all going through such changes in the material world, and one can then transfer one's desires from trying to enjoy the material world to becoming a servant of the servants. Then one will become satisfied and successful. And sometimes people, yes, please. Shri Govinda Dato. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you for nicely narrating this story. As you were mentioning about this King Chitraketu, he became very happy when getting the son and become very, very distressed after losing the son. In the Krishna consciousness of the spiritual life, we see the advanced devotees. Like Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu also went to that state. When he came from Kanainat Shala, he mentioned, like, I saw Krishna when he was coming back from Gaya, and then he left Krishna. So he, there is a mention of Chaitanya Bhagavat, like how he was feeling the same experience, like he had got it and he had lost it, and very intense emotions. So please elaborate, if you can please elaborate, like what is the difference between these emotions, and we also face sometimes some small material things which we gain and lose. So how we can identify those are spiritual material? Sometimes we can identify them in the service also. We get a service or lose a service. So is that a spiritual emotion or material emotion?
So what's your specific question? Because you asked a lot of them. Want to narrow it down?
So the difference is how to distinguish between these two in our practical life. Distinguish between this material emotion and spiritual emotion.
How to distinguish between material emotion and spiritual emotion? Well, first of all, the definition is given in the Chaitanya Charitamrita. That's Atmendriya Priti, means that I have affection for my own senses. I care about my senses and how they're taken care of. So the author of Chaitanya Charitamrita says, this is lust, that my own senses are dear to me. And then he says, Krishnendriya Priti, if Krishna's senses are what's dear to me, his sense satisfaction, that he's satisfied, this is called prema, or love. So the two may look similar because we are sentient beings and we have desires, we move in the world, we may express our desires in certain ways. But the author says the difference is like iron and gold. Prema is like gold, and the desire to satisfy one's own senses is like iron. And the overall experience is very different. The agony, the supposed agony of the devotees in separation from Krishna is a kind of is the pinnacle of spiritual happiness, paradoxically. Described in the Chaitanya Charitamrita as if one was bitten by the most poisonous snake, and at the same time, nectar was being poured on one's head. The intensity of the feeling that the devotees have for Krishna is heightened when there's separation from Krishna. And that separation is the greatest, in that separation is the greatest pleasure. Interestingly, we read a verse the other day in the, we means, I think Navina Nirodhapur was at my house when I was reading the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu aloud. And he was, we were marveling at this verse about how one is feeling separation when a person leaves, and also when we meet our beloved, we're also fearing separation. So there's always a kind of an anxiety. And that tension that takes place is not contaminated. And therefore, there's a way in which the devotees are experiencing the highest pleasure through this. That is described in the Nectar of Devotion, the science of rasa, and how one is experiencing various emotions connected to Krishna that give the highest pleasure. But some of them may look like they're actually similar to the kinds of ways that people suffer in the material world. And the reason that they appear similar is because this material world is a reflection of the spiritual world. But it's very different altogether. And really, the intensity of one's desire, just as a materialistic person is overwhelmed by an intensity of desire to enjoy the material world, the advanced spiritualist is overwhelmed with a desire for service to Krishna. You can't get 2 minutes with a billionaire because he's too busy. You try to make an appointment. In fact, Rakesh Oberol, I talked to him for a long time. Interesting devotee. He lives in Delhi. They call him Hanuman. It's his nickname. He graduated college. He was in Vrindavan, staying at my friend's house, Kashi Ram. He was staying at Prem Kishore's house and wondering what to do with his life. And came to the right place because Prem Kishore is an old book distributor. So he kept preaching to him, you should just distribute books week after week. And he was just sleeping on the floor in there. He comes from a really, exalted family. And so he went back to Delhi, and that's what he started doing. But he does it in a very interesting way. He looks in the trades in Delhi, but he only investigates billionaires. Millionaires are... And so he looks to see who got a windfall, whose company's doing really well. And then he has a team. Actually, when I was there, he only had one other person working with him, but they try to make an appointment to meet this person. And they just are relentless about calling, writing, until they get the appointment. And he told me, when they do get the appointment, he goes in, the secretary will bring him in the room, and he'll say, what will you take? Like they say in India, what will you take? Like they bring you some thumbs up, Campa Cola. He tells him, lukewarm water. I said, why do you tell him that? He said, because if it's cold, that's easy to get. And if it's hot, that's easy to get. But in between, that's really hard. So that buys me an extra, 2 minutes. How are we going to get lukewarm water? So he's in the room longer. He said, because the time with these people is so short. They have so little time. And Prabhupada describes how just like the materialist has so little time because there's another deal and they have to make the next deal and the next deal, even though they have billions already. So the devotee is also like this. The intensity of desire is described in a similar way as Krishna Bhakti Ras Bhavito Mati Kriyatam Yari Kritopi Labdite Tatalolyam Api Mulyam Ekalam Janma Koti Sukritirna Labhyate. Rupa Goswami says that actually this intense desire, just like a materialist has the intense desire, but the devotee has an intense desire to serve Krishna. He said that's the only way that you can actually get Krishna. Is if you have intense desire, and it's described as laulyam, or this greed. It's described as greed. If you have that kind of intense desire, just like a materialist has, to get Krishna. But it's in quality completely different. So we should be attached to our service, and we, in the course of our, practice of devotional service, may experience various ways in which we're there will be obstacles, there may be missteps even, but those who are on the path of devotional service are not dissuaded by these. Could we bring a few more chairs so our guests, if they choose to, they can sit closer if they like? Welcome, Hare Krishna. Thank you for coming. Anything else? Any other reflections? I have more, but I'm just seeing if at this point you have a reflection or two. Yes?
I like the observation you made about the fact that you, because of your karma, you have that tendency to enjoy things and you have no control over it, but you do have control over the service that you do.
Yeah, in the Nectar of Devotion, Prabhupada describes that there are various stages of karma. It's karma-naiva praliyante, Vishnu Bhakti Ratatmanam. There's a way in which these various stages, aparada palam papam, kutam bijam palon mukam, karma-naiva praliyante, Vishnu Bhakti Ratatmanam. Good. This various stages of karma. So there's aprarabdha. Aprarabdha karma means the karma that's not manifest yet. And it's compared in this sequence, you can think of it like seeds, because there are ways in which the karma isn't manifest yet, but it will be later. It's in seed form. And actually, even before the seed, there's an even more subtle stage. And this is interesting because interacting with the modes of material nature means that I become affected by them, whereas Prabhupada used to say, infected. Purusha prakriti stohi bhunkte prakriti jan gunan karanam gunasangosya sarasad yoni janmasu. There's a way in which, because of my connection with the three gunas, I become contaminated. My consciousness is tinged in various ways. I take on these various desires according to sattva, rajas, tamas, and the mixtures, combinations, and permutations of those. And that's the cause of my various destinations in this world, and whatever I get, good or bad, or in between. It all comes from my association with the three modes of material nature. And it's very subtle. So, aprarabdha palam papam. There are stages mentioned, that there's the aprarabdha, unmanifested, and then there's the bij, there's the seed, and then there's prarabdha, which means that it grew into something. And now I'm experiencing it directly, like in the form of this body and everything that goes along with it. And there's also, it's described, one has a predilection, or it's a certain kind of tendency to enjoy the material world in a certain way. And this comes from previous karma also. Because my consciousness is tinged with various modes of material nature. It may not even be manifested yet. Sometimes in a child, you don't see it fully manifest. As he grows up, as she grows up, then the tendency to go in a certain way manifests because of previous karma. But Vishnu Bhakti Ratatmana means that by performing devotional service to Lord Vishnu, all of these stages of karma are destroyed. Karmani nirdahati kintuja bhakti bhajam. Lord Brahma says in the Brahma Samhita that by performing devotional service, one destroys one's karma. And of course, tracing it back, Rupa Goswami says in the Nectar of Devotion that the cause of all suffering is ignorance, because out of ignorance then I create this karma, and then I have to act, I'm forced to act in ways that are contrary to my service nature, my nature as a servant of Krishna, and then I have to suffer. Is there any other reflection? Yes.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji. Prabhuji, sometimes when we serve our, because you are involved in serving, maybe you are not consciously aware that you are serving. Is it the right thing to do or right thing to have? Because when you are in a serving something, your mind may be involved in that activity itself, but you are not consciously aware that you are in a serving mood, or I wanted to serve somebody. Is it the right thing, or somebody needs to be constantly aware that I wanted to serve? Because in that activity you might get not attached, but the activity demands that you don't need to think continuously that you're in a serving mood. I just wanted to get your 2 cents.
Yeah, being in a serving mood may not be such an intellectual process that you have to remind yourself, I'm in a serving mood. It really comes from the heart. There's an impetus that we all have to serve. And just like a mother, it comes naturally to a mother to serve the baby. You don't have to, she doesn't have to think, If you watch the mother all day long, she's serving the baby, and it's not, like, oh yeah, right, I got to serve this little guy, You just like, give him to me, that's my baby. So just services, services comes from gratitude and love, which are not intellectual processes, and it's natural in the soul. That's what the soul is. It's an appreciator. Krishna expands himself. Eko Bahushyam, the one has become many. And what's the use of being the supreme if you can't be appreciated by anybody? I mean, if there's nobody there to taste the supreme, to appreciate the supreme, why be supreme? So Eko Bahushyam, the Vedas say that the one has become many. Why? To increase his enjoyment. And the enjoyment is there on both sides. There's the supreme appreciated, the Vishaya, and there's the supreme appreciator, the Ashraya. The Ashraya means the repository of appreciation and love and the service mood. And the Vishaya means the object of that service. And so it's a very natural thing that, as Prabhupada points out in the introduction to the Bhagavad Gita, everyone's a servant. A serves B, B serves C, president runs for office, and he's saying, I want to take on a lot of service. I want to serve all of you in the whole country really well, too. And this is the natural tendency. So it's a heartfelt, and it is important, though, as we're changing from the mode of serving our senses, of me serving my senses to serving Krishna, to be reminded of the proper mode of service. And therefore we have this vidhi bhakti, through which we practice service. My service may not be selfless in the beginning. I may have mixed service attitude. And as I go on serving, but I'm hearing about the real mode of service. For instance, in the Bhagavatam, it's being described how the servants, the devotees in Vrindavan are serving Krishna. And the devotees hear about that and they become inspired. I remember I took the course in Dallas many years ago. Many of us did here at ISV. We went down for the leadership and management course that lasted about 5 days. Anuttama Prabhu put it on. And it was excellent. Someone had told me there were 2 devotees who were educated, well-educated, they had MBAs, and they told me, this is way better than an MBA. So I said, I think I'll take that. It's only 5 days. And I remember it was interactive, and during one of the presentations, Anuttama had posed a question about how to reward those that were serving in your team in the temple, and somebody said, suggested more service, and he said, yeah, sure, if they're a gopi. And he just moved on to the next one. Like, I just remember how nonchalantly he took that. Someone said, how could we reward them? And he said, more service. And he said, yeah, if they're a gopi, that would be good for them. So there may be a way in which, in the beginning, our service attitude isn't completely pure, full-blown, hasn't completely developed. So there's a way in which we hear about the servants of the Lord, and we also hear about the anomalies that occur from service to Maya. And this goes on as we're purifying ourselves. So it is good to remember, because there's a way in which one's service to Krishna can swerve in another direction. You go across lanes and then start thinking that I'm a great devotee and want to be recognized for one's service. Prabhupada mentions how the Goswamis wrote their literatures, but they didn't do it to be famous authors. A lot of times people write a book because they want to be a famous author, and that's their motivation. In fact, a lot of public speakers, they go out of their way to write a book because that's how they get their speaking gigs. Because if you have a book, you can say, I got a book, I can come talk about it. And it's like, why do you want to do that? Because I want to be a personality, and I want to get on television. It used to be Oprah, I don't know what there is now. And so there's all these, there's this impetus, and that could come into the realm of one's service and devotional service also. I think, the ego is always sitting there waiting to appropriate whatever I do. I'll take that. And so the devotees are careful to keep the verse, Trinadapi sunichena toror api sahishnuna amanina manadena kirtaniya sadahari, to be humble, to cultivate this humility and also not try to take respect for one's service and so forth. Fortunately, because it's our constitutional position, and by serving Krishna, we enjoy more than Krishna in our service. That this higher taste, param drishva nivartate, one will get a higher taste for actually performing selfless service. And so as we continue, okay, so to answer your question, yes, we may have to remind ourselves sometimes, I'm doing this for Krishna, because the false ego may be lurking and trying to appropriate or reappropriate what you're doing, which started out to be a pure thing, and then someone says, yay, you're great, and then it's like, yeah, let me do more service because more people say I'm great. This could be, this could happen, so forth. Kanka.
Also to remember that, Prahlad Maharaj in the Srimad Bhagavatam was talking about the 9 processes of devotional service. So, like there was a story one time with a devotee in Los Angeles who, she had just had a baby and she was chanting and reading, and someone said, Prabhu, you're not doing any service. And she goes, but there's 9 processes of devotional service, and I'm chanting and I'm reading and I'm listening to tapes.
Yeah, definitely. The 9 processes of devotional service.
Because sometimes people criticize devotees if they aren't doing, like, washing the floor or doing the pots or cooking. But, I think everyone has their propensity and their nature. And I think that's really important to honor and respect the 9 processes of devotional service.
It is. I think one aspect of service that is very important is that part of the service mood is that I'm serving a Vaishnav. I'm serving under somebody. I'm the servant of the servant of the servant. In fact, that's the theme of the class. What are the benefits of being the servant of the servant of the servant? So there are ways in which, yes, hearing and chanting, everyone has a propensity for service, and the best kinds of service, and service properly rendered is that which is authorized service. In other words, a service which is given to me. Actually, I'm working under the authority of a Vaishnava. This is the best kind of service. It is unassailable. I mean, just in the case of hearing and chanting, there are ways in which, and I completely agree with your point, that it can be overlooked that chanting Hare Krishna is service. It's the best service. Someone might then say, it's the best service, so I'm going to decide to go to Radhakund and just sit down and chant. And that'll be my service. And if that's authorized, if you've put yourself under the care of an advanced Vaishnava who says, okay, that's for you now in your life. You go sit at Radhakund and chant Hare Krishna 24 hours a day, then fine. But if you decide, I'm going to go chant Hare Krishna, and that's my idea, then its service may not be so authorized, and it may not be effective. What did you find, Yashoda Kumar Prabhu?
Shushrushoch Shradadhanasya Vasudeva Katharuchich Syan Mahat Sevaya Viprach Punya Tirtha Vishavanat. O twice born sages, by serving those devotees who are completely free from all vice, great service is done. By such service, one gains affinity for hearing the message of Vasudeva.
Yes, very nice. The question comes up by Prahlad Maharaj in his prayers that I understand the message of the Bhagavatam. Tasmad ekena manasa bhagavan sattvatam pati shrotavya kirtitavyasya dhyeya pujasya nityada. With one pointed attention, one should hear, chant, remember the Lord. But then he says, I'm so affected by desires for material enjoyment, I can't do that. Now what should I do? And then this verse, Sutta Goswami gives us in the second chapter of the first canto, Shushu Shro Sharadhanasya Vasudeva Kataruchi Syan Mahat Seveya Viprapunya Tirtha Nishevanat. If you just try to render any kind of service to the Bhagavats. There's two kinds of Bhagavats. There's the book Bhagavat, and there's the person Bhagavat, who exemplifies the Bhagavat, the Srimad Bhagavatam. His life is the Bhagavatam. If you serve those two kinds of Bhagavatas, then you'll develop this affinity, a natural attraction for hearing about Krishna. Then you'll be able to actually hear and chant. And of course, the Bhagavatas will also instruct one to hear and chant, even if one doesn't have a taste, because by hearing and chanting, then you'll develop a taste. But it's a very important point, by going on with one's service, meaningful service, then one's mind will come to the point where one actually has an attraction for hearing and chanting. There are different states of mind, which are mentioned in the Yoga Sutras. 5 states of mind: confused, wandering, inattentive, concentrated, and absorbed. And only 2 of them are yoga. The other 3 aren't. And it goes into great detail on what is confused consciousness, what is wandering, what is inattentive, what is concentrated, and what is absorbed. So, if we're able to concentrate on hearing the Srimad Bhagavatam, for instance, we will attain immense benefit. And we'll be able to develop a feeling. And before that, just by rendering service, which means maybe attending Srimad Bhagavatam class even when you don't feel like it, then gradually you'll develop a taste. And when you hear those sound vibrations, the Shastra says, you'll get Krishna's influence in your life. Krishna has an influence on everything and everyone everywhere. But this is special. This is his internal energy. It comes from the Srimad Bhagavatam. So the Bhagavatam says that if you hear those topics with a concentrated mind, then you'll be influenced by Krishna. That influence will start to take over your life. His potency will enter into your life. And then you'll see things properly. And that what is the proper, how is it that you'll see properly? You'll see, I'm a servant. These things are meant to be served. The message is meant to be served. The Bhagavat is meant to be served. The person Bhagavat is meant to be served. It's all for service. Because that's what we are. We're little serving units. And we can either serve Maya, the illusion, that I'm the enjoyer, and I chase after the mirages one after another of material desires. But if I turn towards the real substance, and the real object, which is deserving of my service, which can take my service, then my real life begins and I see reality. And only in that state, when I'm experiencing a taste from service, from selfless service, and being the servant of the servant, that I can eschew the material desires, the lower service to the lower self. And this is mukti, it's liberation. Muktva yata rupam swarupena vyavastiti. Means when one is, this is the definition given in the second canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam of liberation. When one has disconnected oneself from the gross and the subtle body. The gross body is kind of obvious. The subtle body is a little more subtle. And it has to do with our mood, whether I'm a servant of my senses or I'm a servant of Krishna's senses. That's how to judge. And if I see that I'm the servant of the servant and I'm feeling enlivened by that, then I'm getting spiritual light and I'm able to not be influenced by the false ego. And I can see my real constitutional position. This is liberation. Yes?
So Prabhuji, you talked about how selfless service and being like salt. But practically it feels like it may not be possible, because if one does exemplary service and tries to be a salt, it's not, because Krishna glorifies them in a big way. But then one cannot maintain that mood. So how can you be, like when you said you have to have intense desire, like how you want material things, and if you intensely desire for Krishna, then so many things change and it ends in glorification. So how can you be like
This
salt?
is why we practice every day. We don't come to a point and say, okay, I'm good. But every day we work on ourselves and we start over every day as a beginner. And Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said, I'm murka, I'm a fool. Before my spiritual master, I'm a fool, I don't know anything. And the great scholars like Rupa Goswami, Sanatan, they come before Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and say, we don't know anything. I'm considered a great pandit. Everyone says I'm a great pandit, and I'm so foolish, I believe them. But now, before you, I don't know anything. I'm starting over. You please tell me. And so we have to practice like this. And there's a way in which manana, it means we have to become introspective. You'll notice that the great acharyas are looking inside themselves and they're saying, this is how fallen I am. Look at Bhaktivinoda Thakur's prayers. In fact, can I have that? In Bhaktivinoda Thakur's prayers, he's analyzing the psychology of a materialistic mind attached to serving one's senses. And thank you. And he's doing it as a practice, as the acharya, he's showing this is how you do this. You look inside and you notice, where's my mind going? And you be very careful. So in his process of surrender, he's recommending this process of introspection and seeing, how is it that I'm thinking? What is my motivation? And so forth. And here's one small sample. My life is ever given to sin. In it there is not a particle of good. I have caused others great anxiety and have troubled all souls. For the sake of my own enjoyment, I have never hesitated to perform sinful acts. Devoid of all compassion, I am concerned only with my selfish interests. Perpetually speaking lies, I become dejected upon seeing others happy, whereas the misery of others is a source of great delight for me. There are limitless material desires within the core of my heart. I am wrathful, fond of exhibiting arrogance, intoxicated by vanity, and bewildered by worldly affairs. I wear the cherished ornaments of envy and egotism. Ruined by laziness and sleep, I resist all pious deeds. Yet I am very enthusiastic to perform wicked acts. For the sake of worldly fame and reputation, I engage in the practice of deceitfulness. I am victimized by my own greed, being always lustful. A vile, wicked man such as this, rejected by godly people, is a constant offender, devoid of all good works, forever inclined toward evil. He is worn out and wasted by various miseries. Now in old age, deprived of all means of relief, this humbled and poor Bhaktivinoda submits his tale of grief at the feet of the Supreme Lord. Now I have a question for you. I got that book when we were doing our home programs, and I read it to the devotees. We only had one book at the time. And Bhaktivinoda goes on like this in many, many passages. And the devotees were relishing it so much, hearing this. They all said, I want the book, I have to get the book. That's why we all had to pitch in and reprint it, because it was out of print. And they were willing to put in, were you there at the time? The devotees threw in a few $1,000s to get the whole book reprinted. And only they cared they get one copy. This as long as it was reprinted, because they relished hearing this kind of introspection and revealment of this mindset so much. So it's not that the false ego has so much power over us that we'll never become free. Actually, devotional service is relishable. And the mood of a servant is so relishable that the devotee hankers for it, and so much so that looks in his or her own heart and wants as quickly as possible to take out the contamination and saying, there's more, there's more, there's more. Let it all come out so that he or she can really become selfless, really, honestly, without any question in his or her own mind that I am doing selfless service. And this is sincerity. And if I don't have a pure heart, but I'm sincere, I'll still feel the satisfaction, because that sincerity will conquer over the lower nature. And because Krishna helps. He's within the heart, and he realizes this person's sincere, and he helps us to overcome. And even as I'm speaking something which is self-serving, I may be chastising myself simultaneously and feeling I'm such a fallen person to have said that, or have to acted in this way, or why didn't I take that opportunity to do that service for that devotee when I could. One's being introspective and analyzing oneself very carefully. How to, come to this mood of selfless service. It's an occupation. It's devotional service. That's what the process is. It's all about selfless service to come to this point. So it's altogether possible. We're walking the path of the great devotees, and they will help us. And we'll take examples from Narada Muni. He was a young child. He was 5 years old. And he lived in a simple house. His mother was maintaining him, single mom. He didn't know who his father was. where he was. He just had a mother. And these two great-souled sages, described in the 5th chapter of the Bhagavatam, 1st canto, came during the rainy season for this Chaturmasya, and this started everything. He liked them. He served them. They gave him mercy. This is how it all starts. If one serves a devotee, serves a Vaishnava devotee of the Lord, then one's service begins. Here's a quote, in fact. This is how it all starts. Prabhupada says, this is an excerpt from a purport. Under the heading, my heading, serving Vaishnavas is the only way to advance in devotional service. Prabhupada writes, therefore, Narottam Das Thakur has said in many of his songs, Chadya Vaishnava Seva Nishchar Payeche Keba. Without serving a Vaishnav, who has got liberation? Our ambition should be how to serve Krishna through the disciplic succession, guru, and live in the association of devotees. This is the process. So we are opening so many centers all over the world. This is the policy that people may take chance of associating with devotees and the chance of serving the Vaishnav. Then it will be successful. So Narada Muni, just a little boy, it's described there how he served those great-souled sages and took once by their permission remnants of their food, which means that he was intimately connected with that service and he was feeling some appreciation for serving them. This is where the advancement takes place in devotional service, when I am able to serve the devotees. And by that service, he got something. And this is very important because some people think, I'll serve Krishna directly. But Krishna says, no, don't serve me directly, serve the servant, be the servant of my servant. In fact, he even makes this astonishing statement. Those who say they're my devotees, they're not my devotees. This is in the Adi Purana. He said, those who say they're the devotees of my devotees, they're my devotees. And Prabhupada says drastic things like, one should become the servant's servant 1,000,000 times removed. Then this is liberation, he says. Servant, 1,000,000 times removed. This is the mood. So what does it mean? Actually, there's a science behind it, because the servant is actually the repository of Krishna's internal potency and his mercy. That's where it resides. And just like you see a waterfall coming down, it comes down. So one who's below is getting the lion's share of the mercy that's cascading down, from the heart of a Vaishnava to another. And by serving a Vaishnav, the Vaishnav's heart opens and the contents come out to us. That's why Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, Tadvidi pranipatina pariprashnena sevaya upadakshanti te jnanam jnaninas tattvadarshina. It's a science in a way, but it's very real in the fact that the love for Krishna that we're seeking, it resides within the hearts of those who have this service mood. And how can you have a service mood if you think I'm the only one or I'm serving Krishna directly? You have to be very humble. And the more humble you are, the more you're thinking I'm the servant of the servant of the servant. And the more you're open like that, the more that mercy flows in. And we see from the example of Sutta Goswami at Naimasaranya, the sages are telling why he's qualified to sit and teach them. And they say, because you're gentle. You're gentle, and you're also a servant. And you've served all your masters with such attention that they passed something on to you that you now have, and we want it. Now we want to serve you. And this is the way that Krishna's mercy gets passed down from one servant to the next, to the next, to the next. And if one lines up underneath the line of servants coming from Krishna, then it can enter into one's heart. And that's what opens the heart of a person. If you actually serve a person out of love, they'll really open their heart because they have no other alternative. If someone serves you because they're going to get some money out of it, you're going to give them just what they deserve. And you won't be that affectionate towards them because after all, they really wanted the money. They didn't want anything else. That was their main objective. And if someone comes to you and they want your knowledge, because they want to, knowledge is power after all, and if you have knowledge, if you see someone who has a lot of knowledge and you think, if I get that knowledge, then I'll also be powerful, and you come to the person and say, I want your knowledge, I'll serve you, you please tell me. But you're thinking, that's what I want. Then there's only so much that person can give you his knowledge. But if you go to somebody and you serve in love, when somebody gives you out something selflessly, it doesn't matter what it is. And that's why Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, Patram Pushpam Palam Toyam. These are things you can get anywhere. you can just go out and pick a leaf. And it means you don't have to go to Home Depot or anything. You can go outside and get it because that's not what he cares about. He cares about the mood that you're giving it in. And if the mood is there, that this is out of love, it's gratitude. It's just one step away from love. And if you feel some gratitude towards somebody because they're giving you something that's valuable, it's changing your life, and then you say, I'm going to serve you. And it's not for any reason. It's not because you want something in return. That person becomes just indebted to you. Like Krishna says, if someone gives me tulsi leaves and Ganges water out of love, I sell myself to that person. And that's who Krishna is. He is as Vamanadeva for Bali Maharaj surrendering his kingdom and his head, especially his head, and saying, just take whatever I have. I don't care what anybody says, including Shukracharya, my guru. You're Krishna, I'm surrendering to you. That's who I am, that's my prerogative. Vamanadeva says, you purchased me. He lives with Bali Mardon over in Fremont. Probably true. He lives with Bali Maharaj in Patala Loka. And sometimes when the demigods come, this is in Briyat Bhagavatamrita, they come and say, we're fighting a war with the demons, we need Vamanadeva to come. They come to Vamanadeva and say, please, can you come, help us? He says, go ask Bali, because I'm a servant. That's God. That's how indebted he becomes for selfless service. And then they go ask Bali Maharaj, and he says, no, you can't have him. He's staying right here. He's mine. That's the mood in Vrindavan, mamata. This mood that the Krishna is mine. He's mine. He belongs to me. And that's how intimate, that's love. And that's what bhakti is. It means selfless service. It means one that has a service attitude, but it's the most valuable thing, and it's the only thing we can get. Everything else, bounces off of us. We won't penetrate. With material desires, we'll only be frustrated. We only chase after that which appears to be real, but it's not. But love is real, and the real love is directed towards the supreme object of love, which is Krishna. And those who make themselves the servant of the servant of the servant, they are eligible. They're eligible for that. So Narada Muni was an example given to us by Shukadeva Goswami in his description of how to get bhakti. And you see, as a 5-year-old child, what qualification does he have? Not great learning or wealth. He didn't have anything, really, but he had this service attitude to the devotees. And so when he served the devotees, then it's described how he got everything. He describes his internal development and how he began developing an affection for them, an appreciation for them, and then his desire to engage in any kind of worldly activities, it just diminished naturally. And then in course of time, after the sages left, then his mother died, and Narada was on his own as a little child, but he wasn't afraid. He was fortified because of his association with these great souled sages, and he went off on his own to see God's creation. And then he actually met him. And he had this experience, and in his next life he became Narada Muni. So this is given an example. By his service to the sages, he attained this perfection of life. So if one takes this kind of mood and serves Shastra, serves the spiritual master who represents the Shastra, then one begins to hear the language of the soul. Like, everyone else in this world is talking about what's good for your body and mind. And it really doesn't, it's frustrating because it never quite satisfies us. In fact, Narada says this to Vyasadeva in his instructions. Anything you desire to describe in this world that's not directly about Krishna simply disturbs the mind with different kinds of results, like a boat on water which is disturbed by the wind. The mind gets disturbed. What we really want is this language of the soul. We want to hear what the soul really wants and needs. And that's what we hear from the Shastra, from the spiritual master, from the Vaishnavas. And when we hear that, and it penetrates, we begin to experience real excitement about advancement on the spiritual path. So we don't get it directly. We get it through the devotees. From the Chaitanya Charitamrita Madhya Lila, chapter 8, text number 208. There are many verses like this, but this one gives the idea of how indirect becomes direct. Krishna saha radhikara lila jay karai. Nija sukhoi tate koti sukha pai. The happiness of the gopis increases 10 million times when they serve to engage Sri Sri Radha and Krishna in their transcendental pastimes. So in this section of the Chaitanya Charitamrita, the author is describing how through serving those who are serving Krishna, the servitors are enjoying how many times more? That's a lot. In the material world, I think, unless I'm the center, I'm not going to enjoy. And one becomes envious of others when they're in the center. But if one becomes the servant of the servant of the servant, then one becomes satisfied in any condition of life and enjoys more. You enjoy more than the person you're serving. And you also, because your heart is open, you're also able to imbibe. Imbibe means to drink. You're able to drink in the qualities of the person that you're serving. So this is the secret to success. Appreciate. The appreciator becomes the repository of the nectar of devotional service. And therefore, the available mercy comes by being a servant of the servant of the servant. And that's why Lord Chaitanya became a devotee. Krishna comes as his own devotee because he sees this is not right. I'm the supreme enjoyer, but they're enjoying more than me. So how can he let that stand? So he comes as Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in order to taste, to experience the position of the servitor, of the ashraya, and Krishna is the vishaya, the object of that service. So we should take a clue from that we're good enough the way we are. We're servitors, we're appreciators, we're parts and parcels of Krishna. And what is my constitutional position? This is sambandha gyan. It's knowledge of my relationship. If I understand my relationship properly, there's no problem for me. There's never been a problem. It's just my relationship is misplaced. Bhayam dvitiya abhinibesha tasyad ishad aphetasya viparyo smritihi. I've turned my head away from my real relationship. So if I embrace it, the more I embrace being the servant of the servant of the servant, the more I taste the nectar of devotional service, the more it's poured down to me. And yes, we must be careful to not become swept away. This is called Tarangarangani. Tarangarangani means in the course of performing one's devotional service very expertly, with full-hearted enthusiasm, one may become advanced, one will become advanced, and then everyone will come a-running and saying, well, you're really great. And then Tarangarangani means then you can become swept away by that. So you have to be careful to always remain the servant of the servant of the servant. Om Tat Sat. That's final. It's indisputable. It's a flat-out winner. Any other points? Yeah.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna.
My question is, you want to develop the service attitude, but at the same time, if you're facing some anxieties because of the service or because of external factors, what is the reason for it? Is it something wrong within you? You are trying to get the
external factors means? Can you be more specific? That way I can get my mind around your question. So you're serving, but you're being disturbed by external factors?
Yeah. You're having some kind of anxiety in doing a service, or...
What's the anxiety being caused by? Because you're not doing it right? Because
yeah, maybe, or anxiety by others. So
others who are criticizing your service or
maybe
not letting you do it or something like that?
Yeah, maybe, yeah.
Well, there will be anxiety in our service, but Prabhupada, very specifically on a morning walk, my godbrother Guru Kripa was telling Prabhupada, sometimes devotees, they're in anxiety about book distribution. He was talking about that service. He said because they think they can't do as many books as they want, or it puts something about the service, puts them in anxiety. Prabhupada said, tell them that is spiritual anxiety. And then he gave the example of Mother Yashoda. He said, she's always in anxiety. Because what mother isn't? I mean, the mother never has 1 second when she's not in anxiety about the kid. Because the kid's always up to something, especially at a certain age. And, even when it's a baby, the baby's sleeping peacefully and the mother's thinking, I got to be watchful. And she's putting on a talisman and putting, Mother Yashoda was always making these mantras and taking the dust from the cows and putting it on Krishna. And when he was old enough to go to the forest, she'd call him back 12 times every morning to make sure he had his lunch. And then she'd make him eat some before he just had breakfast. And, this is Vatsalya Ras. It's anxiety, but it's Krishna anxiety. So the kind of anxiety that we take for, our service is purifying. And, Prabhupada took on unlimited anxiety. Read the section of the Lilamrita about Bombay. Bombay was like a manager's nightmare. And meantime, Prabhupada was traveling around the world trying to spread the movement here, there, and everywhere. He left Giriraj Maharaj and others, in that situation. And, and some of the greatest revelations come to someone who takes on such anxiety for service. Some of the greatest revelations for those who take such a weight on their heads for their spiritual master to help, in his mission, then they become intimate with Krishna, because there's nowhere else to go, because no one else can appreciate how deeply troubling some services are, except for Krishna and the spiritual master who's been through it also. And we'll see, this person has taken on this trouble for me. Sandipani Muni and Krishna went out to do service for their guru, and they went into the forest to collect wood. Simple thing, but then a huge storm came up, life-threatening. And they were there out in the forest all night. It was dangerous, really dangerous. And the next morning, Sandipani Muni came with a search party, and he found his disciples in the forest. And he blessed them so much. He said, you've taken so much trouble for me. And the Shastra says, Tad vignanartam sagurum eva bigachet samit pani shotriam brahmanishtam. You should, he first says, you must approach a guru. And then it says, how should you approach a guru? With wood in your hands. Samit pani, carrying wood. It means you're bringing something. And it's hard, you're going to some trouble to go get the wood in the forest. And a storm could come up. You could trip and fall. You could break your leg. Anything could happen. But for the devotee, because his objective is correct in life, he's serving the right person, he's serving in the right place, it's never taken as pain or misery. It's actually a kind of purifying nectar for the devotee who takes such anxiety for the sake of the spiritual master's mission. And so that is the best placement one can have. Those who have achieved service, because of their service attitude, somehow or other they've been given service through the authorized channel, they're the most fortunate people in the world. That is the greatest opulence, to have your service. And that service is what will bring you to see Krishna face to face. And the kind of austerity that you go through to perform that service is the greatest purifying force, the greatest purifying sacrifice that you can perform. One way or another, you have to perform sacrifice in this world. So Krishna, in the 4th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, names all these people performing every kind of sacrifice in order to elevate themselves in spiritual knowledge. And then he says, who wouldn't want to perform sacrifice? You can't even live a material life without sacrifice. And he said, you can't be happy in this world or in the next without sacrifice. So become properly aligned as the servant of the servant of the servant, get some service, and then there will be some anxiety. Now, you may at certain times have to adjust your service and make sure that you're doing it properly, make sure that you're serving in the right way, or that, so then you might check in. And that's why it's important to have authorized service and know like the chain of command. It's like you see advanced devotees when they come to a temple. I'll take Radhanath Maharaj for an example. Here's his mood. He'll come to a temple and you say, Maharaj, what would you like to do? He says, you order me and I'll do it. He's not kidding. That's really what he's thinking. Because he knows, I'm the servant of the servant of the servant. He doesn't come in and say, this is what I'm going to do. And tell you what I'm going to do for you here. I'm going to rearrange everything here. He comes in and he says, I'm the servant of the servant. You tell me what to do. And then he encourages everybody else to do the same thing. That's an advanced devotee. That person has a complete awareness to how the mercy is coming down through a line of devotees, servant of the servant of the servant. Prabhupada himself, talking about being a spiritual master of the world. And he said, no, I'm the servant of my disciples. I'm serving them by training them in Krishna consciousness. They're my masters, sent to be by my spiritual masters so that I can have some service. And the moment one thinks that I'm the master, then one's a dog, Prabhupada said. Then you're out of the race. You're kicked out. But as soon as you take this mood, I'm servant, 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 1,000,000 times removed, you're eligible for everything. Bejare munio tagre bhagavan tamadhoksajan sattvam vishuddham shemaya kalpante yenutaniha. Kalpante yenutaniha means if you line yourself up as the follower of the follower of the follower of the great sages who are following Krishna, you're eligible for the same result as the great sages, same result as Srila Dvaipayana Vyasadeva, as Shukadev Goswami, as all the greatest names you can think of. You're eligible, and it doesn't matter you're from Belmont or Burlingame or, well, Burlingame may be exempt, or Fremont or any of the monts. You can be from any mont. It doesn't matter which mont you're from. You can be a little bug. You can be a vulture. Jatayu was a vulture, but he was lined up properly. He had the service attitude, and he was eligible for the highest connection to the Supreme Personality of Godhead relationship. So it's a conundrum for one who is ambitious to enjoy the material world, how becoming the servant of the servant of the servant is the greatest position anywhere. But if we cultivate that, then we get everything. And not only that, we'll become completely free from anxiety and we'll be peaceful at every moment. As Krishna says in the Gita, Bhuktaram Jagyatapasam Sarvaloka Maheshwaram. Suridam Sarvabhutanam Gyatva Mam Shantim Richyati. If you want this peace, you just become my servant. Recognize that I'm the supreme enjoyer and that I own everything and I'm controlling everything. Problem solved. I got no more worries. I'm just a servant. No more problems for me. And so and if you're the servant of Krishna, and servant of Krishna's devotee, better yet, servant of Krishna's devotees, 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 devotee. That's Vaishnavism. Million times removed. And you put yourself in that position. Then you're at the highest position, paradoxically, as the servant of the servant of the servant of the servant. We're done. Gaur Premanande Hari Haribo Vancha Kalpatarubhascha Kripasanabhevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Gaur Bhaktivinoda ki jai. Nachari Armarman, Nachari Armarman, Nachari Armarman, Nachari Armarman, hey, Nachari Armarman, Nachari Armarman, Nachari Armarman, Nachari Armarman.